Hello, everyone, and welcome to the RDAP Summit 2023. Woo! Building on experience, centering communities and data creation and access. My name is Tess Granock, and I'm here with my fellow conference co-chair, Amy Yarnell, and we are so excited that you could join us this year. We are delighted. I loved seeing all the emojis. We are delighted to welcome 323 attendees from across 6 different countries and 3 continents. Before we jump into the conference, I'd like to review the logistical and some other important information you will need to know for the duration of the summit. You can access the full summit schedule from the summit website, which is rdapassociation.org/2023-summit-schedule, both S's capitalized. And we just wanted to note that we will be having many concurrent sessions during the agenda, so please feel free to look at that closely. And where you see a lightning bolt next to a presentation title, that means that it's a pre-recorded lightning talk. So those are 5 minutes in length. We also have a number of social events happening throughout the summit, including a new members and first-time attendees welcome after the keynote today, Kickstarter socials tomorrow and Thursday before the start of the summit days, and a games night tomorrow after the summit. And the sign up is already posted in the games night chat for those interested in hosting a game. Now, we've put together a slide of all the important links that you're going to need, which includes the summit schedule, as well as Whova. Hopefully you have found it already through the in order to get to this session. But if you're looking for it, the other place that you can find it is on the RDAP website, which is rdapassociation.org/summit. For those who'd like to take notes, we are also doing community shared notes again this year, which you can access from the link tinyurl.com/rdap23 notes. They are also available from the notes link in the resources menu. If you like to tweet, follow us on Twitter at RDAPASSN and use this year's summit hashtag RDAP23. We have added a number of resources to Whova, so I wanted to give you a quick tour. To view the 13 spectacular posters submitted for this year's summit, visit the posters page under the agenda. Each poster will be presented in one of our 2 synchronous poster sessions. The session the presenter will be presenting in is indicated in the title, the number in the blue square in the top right-hand corner, and with the exact date and time in the description of the poster. During the synchronous poster session, each poster presenter will be available to answer questions in their own breakout room, and you'll be able to choose which poster to visit by clicking on the breakout room's icon, clicking join a breakout room, and then clicking on the join button next to the poster's title. When you're in a breakout room, you can switch to a different poster by clicking on the breakout room icon, clicking choose breakout room, and then clicking the join button next to a different poster title. We also have a number of active discussion topics going on in the community, such as one of my favorites is the pets topic. I love seeing the pictures of all your pets. This is also where you'll find the Ask Organizers Anything chat, which is the best way to get your questions answered, because chances are if you have a question, there are other attendees who also have the same question. And thank you to everyone who has shared your photos so far. I'm glad it's not just me anymore. And if you shared a photo through the discussion boards, it will end up on the photos page. But if you add a photo directly to the photos page, you can add one of the lovely photo frames with our digital photo booth. RDAP may be happening virtually, but that doesn't mean that you aren't out of the office. Feel free to disconnect from your inbox and let others know that you're out of the office by copying one of the out of office messages in Whova. Look for the auto reply page under resources. If you would like to snazz up your Zoom background like Amy and I have, feel free to choose one of the RDAP virtual backdrops. We have 7 available to choose from, and you can, and among those as 3 specifically for this year's summit. If you're new to Whova, Whova has put together these handy dandy guides, which are also available under resources. As the Research Data Access and Preservation Summit organizers, we are committed to providing an environment where all attendees can participate fully in the program and activities without fear of harassment or discriminatory behavior of any kind. The RDAP Code of Conduct applies to all spaces managed by the RDAP Summit organizers, including but not limited to the summit, workshops, and community forums, such as the email list. Participation in the summit indicates an acceptance of this code of conduct and the procedures by which the summit organizers resolve any code of conduct incidents. For the full code of conduct, see rdapassociation.org/code-of-conduct. We will have code of conduct helpers in each session of the summit. In this session right now is Lindsay, and they have indicated that they are code of conduct helpers in Zoom, and you can also find them listed as code of conduct helpers in Whova, so feel free to contact them directly. Or you can email codeofconduct@rdapassociation.org or complete the incident form tinyurl.com/coc-report-2023. This year, we're piloting an external professional conflict resolution facilitator to help folks have difficult conversations about interactions that aren't necessarily a code of conduct violation. The goal is to provide a restorative and enlightening experience. And more information, as well as the request form, are on the resolution page of Whova. We've asked presenters to archive their posters and slides in the RDAP Summit OSF. If you don't find them on the OSF page, they should be available on the Whova platform. Recordings of presentations will also be shared on the RDAP YouTube page, and keep in mind that some presentations will not be made available in recordings, so look for the recording symbol in the agenda for which presentations will be recorded. We are partnering again this year with the Journal of eScience Librarianship to publish a special issue featuring work presented at the summit. The call for submissions will be coming out after the summit with a deadline of early June. They'll also be looking for write-ups about the summit itself from attendees, so keep that in mind. The last bit of logistical information, we need your feedback to make each summit better than the last. We listened to the feedback you give us. We improved registration for speakers, enabled Zoom reactions, and pre-populated the community note-taking document with more information. Let us know what you think about these changes and any aspect of the summit in the post-summit survey, which will be sent out after the summit, or if you think of an improvement that you want to share right away so you don't forget, you can submit it through our feedback form on the feedback page under resources. And now I will turn things over to my co-chair, Amy.
Thanks so much, Tess. And at this point, we would like to thank our sponsors, one and all, for your generous contribution and support of RDAP. You have our warmest thanks and appreciation, and we hope you know how much your support is valued. Thank you to our cultivator level sponsor, Elsevier, to our collaborator level sponsors, Cornell University Library, Spark, the University of Arizona University Libraries, University of Miami Libraries, and the Information School at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Thank you to Dryad, our connector level sponsor. And thank you again to Dryad and Elsevier for sponsoring our 2 keynote speakers this year. We were also able to award a number of scholarships to attend the conference, thanks to the support of Elsevier and the generous donations of our RDAP Association members. And congratulations also to all of our scholarship recipients. We hope that you enjoy the conference. If you'd like to interact with any of our sponsors, you can find them in Whova by looking for the Sponsors tab on the left-hand side menu. You'll be able to chat with them and get more information. And this summit would not be possible without the work of so many volunteers, including many attendees who stepped up to help with moderating sessions, discussion board, technology troubleshooting. It allowed us to put together a conference with more concurrent sessions than we've ever been able to do before. Special thanks to our RDAP committee volunteers. Literally every committee in RDAP has a role to play in making this conference happen. So thank you to website, sponsorship, marketing, membership, DEIA, education, publishing, and of course, thank you to our executive board. We are so grateful for your leadership. And finally, last but certainly not least, a huge special thank you to our awesome, outstanding conference planning committee. We're so thankful for all the work you've done this year to put this conference together. We know that there was a lot to do, and please know how much we acknowledge and appreciate it. And we hope you also get to enjoy the conference. So thank you, Hannah, Anthony, Linda, Emily, Michael, Abigail, Dylan, and Ashley. Okay, and so now we are going to start with our first sessions. If you are attending session 1A, data repositories, you can stay right here and we'll begin in just a minute. If you are attending session 1B, teaching and outreach, you can either get there through Whova or I will put a link to that in the chat.
Let's get the show on the road. All right, thank you all for attending. This is session 1A, that's data repositories at the RDAP Summit 2023. This is a Zoom webinar. Attendees are muted and your cameras are turned off. We'd ask that if you have any questions that you want to ask of the presenters, that you put those questions into the Q&A, which is at the bottom of your screen. This session is going to run from 12:10 to 1:10 p.m. Eastern. And we're going to leave about 15 minutes or so, depending on presentation length, for Q&A at the end, and we'll do all of that at the end. This session is going to include 2 live presentations, followed by 2 pre-recorded lightning talks. And you'll be able to ask questions of the presenters for both the live and recorded talks at the end. Because we're doing the questions at the end, it'd probably be a good idea if you would indicate the presenter or presentation that your question is directed towards, so that we know how to direct that question. And you can put those questions in throughout the presentations, but we're going to address them at the end. And then, of course, after the session, if you want to continue this conversation, you can keep asking questions and have conversations through the Whova chat, which is in the Whova application side. A word about our code of conduct. The Research Data Access and Preservation, RDAP Summit organizers, are committed to providing an environment where all attendees can participate fully in the program and activities without fear of harassment or discriminatory behavior of any kind. There is a code of conduct helper available during the session, and I believe that is Lindsay, yeah, indicated by the code of conduct helper tag. And you can direct any messages to them if in Whova if you need any assistance. They can give you the code of conduct email address or the link to the incident report form if you need it. All right. So our first presentation today is learning from our repository communities, a project for the new decade of PER. This is Reed Baim and Kaushiki Pohit from Purdue University. Go ahead and take it away.
Sounds great. Thank you, Anthony. You go ahead and share my screen. Can everybody see okay? Great. All right. So what I'd like to do first is to, say thank you for having us. And I wanted to introduce PER to you all. For those of you who haven't heard of us before, we're the Purdue University Research Repository. We were developed in 2012, and we are devoted to providing an online platform for collaboration and data sharing for our researchers at Purdue and their collaborators. So I am going to turn it over to Kaushiki, and she is going to tell you about a project that we've been working on to learn more about everyone here and repositories in general. So go ahead, Kaushiki.
Right. So allow me to introduce PER to you. Recently, we reached the 10 years milestone, and it has grown a lot from its initial stages and is home to a large amount of research data sets. But now PER faces new challenges from its users based on developing standard preservation policy and effective cost models. So to do that, we decided to learn from our peers based on their policies, services, and software research. And finally, we consider some open-ended questions about the future developments of data repositories in the next decade. Next slide, please. So this is the current view of PER, and at present, the functionalities are shown here. And you can see it is a pretty standard regarding data preservation. So moving on. So this is basically how our project started out. And because we aim to learn from other repositories, communities to improve PER, we studied them based on 3 categories. That is policies, the services offered, and the software. And we compared certain key points based on these categories across the 10 repositories. And our primary research questions were related to the duration and process of data preservation, the type of curation support provided, and the use of metadata. So we went through various preservation policies and analyzed our findings. Moving on. This is basically a snapshot of our findings. So based on the policies, we observed that most repositories do not provide a set preservation time limit, but they will at least preserve the data for 2 years in the minimum. And further, there is a large variation in the size of data being preserved. So we observe this varies from 1 GB to 2 TBs in certain cases. Also, considering the services provided, we saw that all the repositories provide a data management and planning tool to support the depositors, and all the depositor datasets are given a permanent identifier. However, we noticed that the curation support varied widely across the repositories. And based on the software, we focused mainly on the interface and the repository dashboard, the data visibility and the accessibility. And regarding the preservation plan, we saw that most of the repositories favored having multiple backups in different geographic locations. So moving on to our own policies, this is how it is structured. So it specifies the length of time a data set will be shared through the platform and hosted in Hub 0 and Preserve. And it ensures that the library will preserve and maintain the content for up to 10 years after publication. And after this duration is up, the data sets are to become the part of the library's collection. And presently, we have 2 different plans depending on whether the project is grant-backed or not. And for basic projects, we are allowing sizes up to 1 GB. And for grant-backed projects, we allow sizes up to 10 GB. But both of them are retained for 10 years. But maintaining the library collections is not an easy task, and we have to consider the storage costs for long-term preservation of large-scale data. So there is a need for a more flexible preservation policy that addresses these aspects. And moving on to our findings, this list here shows the key points that we were interested in learning from others, and it has a focus on the preservation policies. So regarding the retention length, we noticed that a large portion didn't address it, and some of the repositories did not offer any time limits. But after the duration was up for the repositories, they either kept the data sets or removed it based on different criteria. And further, if the project was grant-backed, the data set was usually retained. Moving on, these were some of the criteria we identified based on which the repositories returned or kept the data set. We also noticed that they supported requests for extension of retention as well. And so because of the large range in the data set size that is allowed, one has to consider the limitations and methods to handle the large scale data for a long period of time. So now Dr. Bain will guide us through the services and software uses.
Thank you, Koshiki. So to take a look at per services, one of the things I want to share is that we have two different ways of publishing data or having data within the repository. So we have the one where you're on the platform and you have the web page and links and usage statistics. We also have the ability to register data so that you can store your data files elsewhere. You still get the DOI and get listed with the citation. It just offers a little bit of variation. We have our project space, which is kind of a nice feature to have for collaboration. And of course, many of the things that all repositories offer, as well as a fairly robust preservation model, which we'll talk a little bit more about preservation in the next part. So we wanted to see a little glimpse of everything that folks are doing in terms of services, and was really surprised to see all of the different things that are listed. And you can see, as Koshiki mentioned earlier, that data management planning and DOIs are a huge part of what we all do. But one of the things that we were really intrigued about were some of the different integrations, like hosting interactive content in GitHub and the analysis tools that and would love to learn more about these things. But these are what folks are looking at. And curation, another point, the variation between how they were described. And as I should mention too, that this is talking to the public, and so there may be a lot of things that are left out, but these are some of the basic things that we saw. Promotion and visibility, these are all fairly standard that we see. And then collaboration, I thought was really interesting. Of course, the Data Curation Network, the group does fabulous work. But thinking about the shared base platforms and how that communities can grow up around that, I think Dataverse is a really good example of that as well. To take a little bit of a glimpse at per software, we have the base platform Hub 0. And then in this second layer, we have the different actions, the functions that come within the data repository. One of the things that we do is have the apes that we do right within the data repository, as well as some data analysis and data visualization so that users and the researchers have more information about how their data site is being used and how it will be for anyone who wants to access it. And then on the third level, we have the different communities that we interact with for making data as fair as possible and providing maximum access and benefits. So this is the things that were most important for us to find out more information about, specifically methods and processes and workflows, things that the ways that the system can function to provide those services. So you can imagine that this was less apparent through the interfaces that we were looking at, specifically because they were public facing. So we got as much information as we could. And there was, there were a lot of things. I think one of the big things that we saw was descriptions of preservation and preservation methods. As Koshiki mentioned earlier, there's the attention to geographic redundancy. One of the things that I'm specifically interested in is the term standard level, and something that having that definition as a community is something that would be really interesting to start to understand between us. There's some other things that we found that we were looking at. You can see the basic functions. These are things that PER does, that the major things that our repositories do. We looked at metadata, and this looks at the functions of the system to provide metadata, as well as the schema. We use Dublin Core. We also use Premise and METS for doing our archiving and preservation. And you can see that a lot of the metadata comes from user entry. And here are the basic platforms that we found. DSpace and Dataverse were most frequently seen, but there were a lot of different ones listed. All right. So now future steps for PER. And so here we get into we had our birthday. So we are over 10 years old now. And so we are looking towards, so much has happened since 2012. We have 2 OSDP memos now, the NIH policy that's coming out, and that did come out, I should say. And so now we're looking at, how do we think about post-retention period and our options? Because things are so different, prices for storage are different, all of those things. And we can't go back. We got to start reaching out. And then we're thinking about the software development for the platform and how we really can institute these services that we would like in terms of integrations, whether it be visualizations, whether it be the DMPs, and also looking at some of the large scale aspects, whether it's creating a cost model or utilizing a utility like Globus. So these are all things that we're really excited about. And but I think that the community really gave us some clarity on what was happening in other places and what folks are thinking about, basically because we've all grown so much over the past 10 years, started and grown. And really a big important thing for us about presenting today was to really give you all an opportunity to engage as a community. And we would really like to invite folks to do more of a virtual discussion beyond this presentation. We would like to learn from you all about some of these things, hear about your questions as well. Really top of our mind right now is care and how care relates to the repository. But to just put that out to you and to kind of say, we could learn from each other. And as we move into the next decade, we'll be a lot more informed about how we work for our researchers. So please reach out to us. This is our email. You can also message us during the conference, and just want to say thank you for having us.
Great, thank you both. Really great presentation and tremendous work getting a repository up and keeping it up. All right, so we'll move on to our next presentation. Reminder to put any questions you have in the Q&A. Our next presentation is Building a Trustworthy Data Repository, Leveraging Core Trust Seal Certification as a Lens for Service Improvements. Our presenters will be Kara Key, Clara Lorente, and Michael Book from Oregon State University. So please take it away.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm Kara, the Digital Repository Librarian for Oregon State University Libraries. I'm joined today by Clara, who is our Data Management Specialist, and Michael, our Scholarly Communication Librarian. Today, we will be sharing our experience pursuing Core Trust Seal Trustworthy Data Repository Certification for our university's institutional repository, Scholars Archive at OSU, and how that experience led to service improvements for our repository. Before we begin, we acknowledge that our institution, Oregon State University in Corvallis, Oregon, is located within the traditional homelands of the Marys River or Ampinafu Band of Kalapuya. Following the Willamette Valley Treaty of 1855, Kalapuya people were forcibly removed to reservations in Western Oregon. Today, living descendants of these people are a part of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde Community of Oregon and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians. Indigenous people are valued contributing members of the Oregon State community and represent multiple sovereign tribes among students, faculty, staff, and alumni. During our time today, we will give some context about our institutional repository and digital preservation work, describe our motivations for pursuing Core Trust Seal certification for Scholars Archive, share our experience with the application process, and talk about the service improvements that we made as a result.
Scholars Archive was created in 2004, and it's built on Samvera and Hyrax. Contains over 78,000 items, including the usual things, theses and dissertations, research articles, conference papers, and we also provide for long-term preservation, storage of, and access to research data sets, primarily those associated with student theses and dissertations and faculty research articles. All data sets are reviewed by a data curator who ensures that the data sets are thoroughly described, organized, and formatted before going live. Our library has committed to digital preservation by establishing an overarching digital preservation policy that describes the library's mission to make accessible and hold in trust for future use the digital resources housed in our repositories. We also have a specific preservation policy for the IR. The library is also formally committed to digital preservation in our two most recent strategic plans, which were essential in establishing the importance of digital preservation for our library.
So why did we want to pursue certification? Our main motivation was to ensure the good quality of the repository. And we had been doing a lot of work at different levels to work on this quality issue. You have here a screenshot of an article that we published as an RDAP special issue. We presented it in RDAP 2019 that talked about this issue of data quality. And we had also been having lots of conversations with colleagues at the University of Oregon. But it seemed like a certification process would be a good way of evaluating our practices more systematically and thoroughly. Our other motivation was to serve our researchers better. We wanted to help researchers understand that our repository is a good quality repository, and we also wanted to help them justify the use of our repository in data management plans. And right now, knowing that there's a new OSTP memo that just came out, the new NIH policy, and lots of new policies that are going to come up very soon, and that will presumably talk about quality repositories, it does seem indeed like a good idea. The final thing that we had to do just to decide whether to pursue certification or not was to take a look at different types of certification and make sure that there was one appropriate for our needs. For those of you who may not be super familiar with certification levels, there are basically 3 levels of certification. The core level is the most basic level. This is the one that the Core Trust Seal falls under, and this is the certification we ended up pursuing. So you'll hear a lot more about this in the next slides. The next level is the extended certification, which is a very similar certification, but it has a lot more criteria that need to be met. And finally, there's the formal certification that is based on the ISO 16363 standard. It is the most demanding, and it involves a formal audit in which reviewers come to the organization to see how the repository is working. So for our repository at that time, it seemed like the Core Trust Seal, the basic level, was the perfect level. It was appropriate for our needs.
In order to be certified, the repository must either be in the process of meeting or have fully met the criteria for each of the 16 core trustworthy data repository requirements that are listed here. The requirements cover every aspect of a repository, including its organizational infrastructure, how digital objects within the repository are described and managed, and the technical infrastructure and security that's in place. The process of certification involves writing a self-evaluation that is evaluated by a team of Core Trust Seal reviewers. It's an iterative process in which the applicants respond to the reviewers' comments until they are satisfied. There's no site visit or audit, so the reviewers must rely heavily on evidence in the form of publicly available documentation and policies. The certification is renewed every 3 years and costs €1,000 at the beginning of the process. When we decided to pursue the certification, we had extremely limited experience with trusted digital repository certification. This was all new to us. The people we included in the process are those who are most invested and involved in digital preservation at our library. We began the process in 2019 and completed it in 2022, going through all 5 rounds of reviewer feedback before getting approved. It was a long process because we had to do a lot of work to meet the requirements, especially by documenting our practices. The Core Trust Seal website does note that the process can take much less time. We involved other library staff, such as those responsible for programming, our servers, and information security as we needed in the process. And we benefited greatly from examining the applications of repositories at similar institutions.
So at the end of our final round of review, we were successfully certified by Core Trust Seal. Obviously, that is very gratifying. We set out to accomplish this goal. We invested a lot in the process. And as a result, we have this unambiguous indicator of quality, which will allow OSU researchers to feel confident depositing their data in Scholars Archive. Along the way, though, when the outcome was still uncertain, we realized that whether we ultimately were certified or not, we were getting significant benefit out of the application process itself. Going through this exercise of examining our own services gave those of us working in the repository the opportunity to engage in a sort of guided critical reflection. The 16 detailed requirements for certification led us to think about what makes a repository trustworthy. Reviewing examples of successful applications revealed some things that similar repositories are doing well. Composing our own responses demonstrated gaps that we had in knowledge and in services. And the feedback that we got at each stage provided targeted recommendations for things that we could be doing better. As mentioned, the evaluation uses evidence from publicly available documentation. So to compose our responses, we had to look closely at Scholars Archive through the lens of our policies and user guides. As a result, we made several updates. Among these changes, we incorporated the library's teaching mission into our collection policy by stating clear learning goals for data depositors. We added an assurance of future custodial responsibility for our content in the event that the institutional repository was suspended. And we expanded the preservation policy for Scholars Archive, more on preservation on the next slide. And we also clarified the relationship between the repository preservation policy and the library-wide digital preservation policy. In addition to policy revisions, we updated our user guidance, including adding a detailed new guide for preferred file formats for Scholars Archive deposits. With regard to preservation, the application feedback showed that we needed to expand upon our existing approach and communicate our preservation strategy in a more concrete way. We were told that, quote, without a clear commitment to active preservation, we could not be considered in scope for the Core Trust Seal trustworthy digital repository status. So in no uncertain terms, a well-articulated preservation strategy is a central element for a trustworthy repository. Prior to the application, our policy stated a commitment to bit-level preservation, along with a general assurance that, quote, stored digital content will remain both viable and accessible into the indefinite future. We added components to our preservation plan and policy that are focused on active preservation strategies. A key change was making the explicit guarantee that objects submitted using recommended formats would remain usable indefinitely. To support this guarantee, we committed to format migration as indicated by evolving standards. We also restarted regular automated fixity checking, which had been disabled, so that we could spot and address bit-level problems using backups. We developed a plan for an active annual preservation assessment, which includes monitoring the file format landscape, inventorying the formats within the repository in order to address migration needs effectively, updating our format recommendations, and reviewing our policy each year. Certification was a catalyst to bring together groups of people in our library with common interests. In addressing preservation requirements, we reconvened our inactive digital preservation interest group. Examining the decision-making process for repository services, we started a cross-departmental advisory group to weigh in on these matters. And working on a team to compile our application, we needed to pull together distributed documentation from various departments and systems. And this served to boost everyone's knowledge and promote information sharing. And occasionally, it also let us resolve some inconsistencies. Now that it's published, the application itself serves as an up-to-date record of the repository as well. And speaking for myself, working on the application proved useful as an intensive orientation to the repository as I transitioned from being the metadata librarian into my current role as digital repository librarian around the time we submitted our final revision last year. Improvements to data services in Scholars Archive are, of course, ongoing. For instance, we will complete our first annual preservation assessment this spring. There are also several areas for improvement that we identified during the certification process, but have not yet completed, including investigating expansion of our use of meta-archive to preserve Scholars Archive datasets. And Core Trust Seal certification is valid for 3 years, so we will need to reapply with updates in 2025. At that time, we hope to move from in implementation phase to fully implemented in a few requirement areas.
Conclusions. First of all, a challenge. It was a little unclear at times whether our institutional repository was in scope for the certification. We had the impression that reviewers were more used to working with discipline-specific repositories. So for example, we kept running into the question of, should we describe how we manage data sets only, or should we describe how we manage all the content of the repository? However, we did get certified. There are other institutional repositories that are certified. So institutional repositories are in scope, but if you're going to go through the process, know that it may be more challenging. The second one is more of a take-home message for us, which is the importance of public-facing documentation. It's not good enough to just do things well, to have good practices, or to have good internal documentation. It's important to have documentation for the public too. We believe that in general, our goals were met. We did a lot of work to make sure that our repository is of good quality. We didn't get a lot of feedback from researchers because that's just not how we operate, even though we're working on a project to get some of these feedback. But we did get some positive feedback from others, for example, the research office. And if we have some listeners today who are wondering whether they should pursue certification or not, these are some of our recommendations. First, to include members in your team with a wide range of expertise. So for example, in our case, we had not included people that had expertise in infrastructure and systems. So that meant a lot of back and forth through Slack and email and whatnot to get to all the details. It would have been better to have them there. In general, we think that going through the certification is a good process for ensuring the longevity of a repository and the digital objects. However, even if you're not interested in pursuing certification, just going through the 16 criteria internally can be very useful. And as Michael mentioned, the website of the Core Trust Seal has all the published reports of all the successful applications. So that's also a very good resource to see how other repositories, like the practices of other repositories. And this is all. Thank you for listening to us, and we'll answer questions at the end.
Great, thank you all. Great presentation, and boy, what a tremendous amount of work you must put into that. Great for us to learn about. So we're going to start now. We're going to start our first lightning talk, pre-recorded lightning talk.
Everybody, my name is Mark Hannell. I'm the founder and CEO of Figshare, and today I'm going to be talking about the community push towards fair data, how this is a big issue across all of the different communities, and we're uniquely situated in that we have a broad range of locations, a broad range of content, a broad range of users using the platform. And so trying to unify that and push the use of fair data across the different research outputs that we host is a challenge. And so if we start there with the different types of things that we are looking at, for example, figshare.com is a free generalist repository, but we also power institutional repositories and data repositories that have a range of moderation, and so a range of enhancement when it comes to metadata. There is also things like the location that needs to be thought about. So different communities have different rules around data sovereignty. They also have different rules around the types of content that they want to publish from their university and the types of ways in which that content is disseminated throughout the larger web. So you can see we have different language support, different visualization of the files, so you can just access them, and different levels of access, right? So we're working with this grouping of content, which really includes everything. We also have use cases where people are using repositories in different ways. So some of this can be very beneficial to the making data fair. I think making data fair, making research outputs fair, non-traditional research outputs fair, is all about the enhancement of the communication. So things like the Visualize Your Thesis repository from the University of Melbourne looks at a 60-second video summarizing the thesis. So it does become more accessible to a lot of people in the true sense of the A in FAIR. As I mentioned, we also make sure that all of this content is discoverable in a way that not only makes sense across the Figshare infrastructure, but also is pushing content to the right location. So all data sets are made available with Google Dataset Search Schema, so it is accessible through Google Dataset Search. We also make sure that you can add faceted search on all of your research outputs, so you can begin to find exactly what you're looking for. When we talk about findable, I don't think too many researchers are searching in a way for research data. So in the same way that they're just clicking through from papers to find the research data. So I think really focusing on the search experience for users is a very important aspect of when we're thinking about findable data. So as you can see, there's a lot of complications and a lot of broadness to the research outputs that we're looking at and how we're trying to make fair. So we have to source information from a lot of different areas. For that, we offer varying layers of support. Obviously, there's a support help desk for the free users, but also the institutional users get a heightened layer of support. And when I say heightened layer of support, every object that you saw from all of those different researchers, from all of those different universities, had different types of content, but we also make sure that we train people on how to use the API so that they can make sure that this content is being pulled into the right places for that local context. We also have launched Figshare Plus, which is a mid-level service that offers curation. Not every university has curation on their research outputs, and we find that if you make your data available and somebody has curated it or checked it, then you get more metadata, which ultimately leads to more discoverability. So plus.figshare.com. And as you can see here, we recently presented at ERNL on the impact of having curation of data sets. It really does help if you can, if you have someone in the library, or if not, this is a gap filler. And then the layers of enhancement. We are constantly building a product. So we're very lucky to be part of the Generalist Repository Ecosystem Initiative from the NIH. And this is looking at from the very baseline of the free Figshare.com, also pushing up into the institutional repositories that we offer, adding enhancements around fairness. And a lot of this is metadata expansion, adding raw, expanding ORCID, enhancing funding IDs, and making sure all of this is available through the APIs as well. We have a Figshare community for all of our clients where it's just a Slack community where they can all discuss and improve the conversation. So we're removing the barriers to having that open communication. And we're also improving the product based on the feedback from the funders, the clients, and the end users themselves. For example, we have a new edit item page that's coming out, which incorporates user suggestions, accessibility enhancements, and new feature developments. So there's a lot going on. It's a big effort. There's a lot of broadness to the way in which we work, but we will continue to do this to make sure that all research outputs are as fair as possible. It's not an easy job. It's not a quick fix, but we will get there.
Hello, I'm Allie Kirsten, the Research Data Management Librarian at Auburn University. And today I'm going to talk to you about data science ready repositories, what that means, and some of the potential implications. For those of us who are associated with repositories, we want the data that goes into them to be as fair as possible. I think we tend to want reusability to be first and foremost because we don't want our repositories to be mere data warehouses. The I has usually had the most emphasis on machine processes, but that may be starting to change. And we may actually see a greater emphasis on machine processes in the R, in the reusable. Now, the impetus for this talk came from a Dryad community meeting where some of the Dryad leadership was discussing an increased emphasis on the I and the R in FAIR and making the repository more data science ready, and in fact, consulting with data scientists. And that got me thinking about this, but I don't mean to pick on Dryad because this is part of a larger trend. I'm sharing here a screenshot from Nature's research data page. And while AI ready and data science ready are not exactly the same thing, they are related concepts. They involve similar changes to data deposits, and it's sort of operating in the same space. And the research that was discussed in this blog post was utilizing AI to characterize particles, sort of very exciting research. And it's the sort of thing that gets people really invested in data science ready repositories. But as we know, there are many different ways to do research. There's a tremendous diversity of methodology, data types. And so what about the types of research that can't be made data science ready in the sense of, for instance, being very uniform, very easy for machine processes to ingest, formatted in such a way as to be aggregated with other data sets? And also, what does that say about taking research results apart from the potentially necessary context that would allow them to be analyzed in ways that maintain validity? And I also thought about, what are we saying about the relative value of research that can easily go into automated workflows versus that can't? What is more important to preserve, or even more important to undertake and fund? Once data is in these data science ready repositories, very easy to crawl and ingest, we're seeing some parallel issues right now come up around the idea of AI art, which tends to use publicly available art on the web as training data, and also in the space of code and coding with publicly available GitHub code being crawled. These AIs require these training data sets, but just because something is public on the web does not mean that it has no licensing and no terms of reuse. I can easily see this being an issue for data in open repositories as well. And finally, when we who advise data depositors help them to choose a license, there's always discussion over whether we should give them a public domain license, CC0, or whether we allow them to, for instance, choose a CC BY license. And I've heard the argument that it's more appropriate to license data, especially raw data, observations about the world, as CC0 because you cannot copyright or claim intellectual property over a fact of nature. And that's absolutely true. But as we move more towards these refined data sets that are, for instance, data science ready, AI ready, we know that a ton of processing has to go into creating those. That rearranging of the data seems to me to be a form of creative work. And if nothing else, it ought to prompt us to rethink the rationale around licensing open data, because it's increasingly the form and the refinement of that data that is the value add, and that people are being encouraged to move towards as they deposit. Thank you for listening to me today, and I am happy to take any questions you may have.
Great. Thank you, Mark, and to Allie for submitting your recordings. I know there were a few technical issues with the image being a little bit blurry and in the corner. We appreciate the talks, really great content, and I'll leave it to our moderator, our organization to answer some of those technical questions about the availability afterward. I do want to spend a little time with the Q&A. We don't have a lot of time. I know a number of the questions have already been answered in Q&A. So if you go to the answered, it looks like our presenters, and I thank them for this, have been answering questions as we've been going through. If you want to see any of those responses, they are in the answered section. We still have, okay, going once, going twice. All right, well, thank you to all of our presenters and to the audience for participating. This has been a really exciting discussion and wonderful to hear about all the work you're doing. We'll see you at our next session. We're going to go into a break now. It's a 10-minute break. If you're planning on staying on for the session 2A, it's the same Zoom link. You're welcome to just sort of hang out here until the next session starts. If you're planning on going into session 2B, it's a different Zoom link, which you can get through the Whova platform. But yeah, join me in thanking all of the presenters. They've done a great job, and we really appreciate your time and your expertise.